So to warm up our audience, we have a little bit of some questions, quiz-type questions for you to see how involved you've been with us over the years. So I'd like to start by asking you to raise your hand if you ever visited the museum or were involved in some way when we were located on the town square. I thought there would be a lot of you. Okay, thank you. Raise your hand if this museum was the first museum you ever visited. Anybody? Your older audience. If we ask them, I didn't do that in the negative. But if we do find that a lot of the kids who come here, it is their very first museum experience, and we're pleased to give them a good experience for their very first ever museum experience. But how about, was this ever the first museum visit for your children or your grandchildren? Did you ever bring children or grandchildren? Very good, I thought so. Yep, thank you. Raise your hand if you ever attended an artist party for our miniature show at Nora's Fish Creek Inn in Wilson. Yeah, a few of you. It's been a while since we've had it out there. Raise your hand if you've ever purchased a work of art at Western Visions. Wow, thank you. Fabulous. And last of all, raise your hand if you have been a trustee or a volunteer or a staff member of this museum, past or present. Yay! A lot, thank you. All of these people have contributed in wonderful ways, all of you have, and we thank you for that. Now we have some warm-up questions for our panelists. Are you ready? Okay, here's how it's going to work. Did you notice you have a small clicker in the shape of a frog on your in front of you? Test it, push the little circle on the back, make sure it works. Okay. Has anyone ever played Jeopardy where you click when you know the answer? Okay, if you know the answer, raise your hand up high so I can see it and click it at the same time. Okay. Questions for our panelists. Let's see how they do. Okay, panelists. The first one's easy, okay?
Can I say something?
Of course.
Is this on?
Yes.
Before we start, let's give you, Dean, a round of applause for 27 years. She was a freshman in high school when she started here.
Okay, first question. What animal is featured on the museum's first logo?
That was me! Wrestling bear.
This is a tie, but Maggie, I'm going to choose Kavar. Kavar.
Well, she already squealed. It was grizzly bear. But I'm the one who clicked first. I think we have proof on film.
Question number 2. Are you ready?
Oh, no.
This one's harder. I'm warning you. This one's much harder. Okay. What 4 names has this museum gone by in its 31-year history? 4 names. Sue?
Yeah, I'm going to give it a try. Wildlife of the American.
Wildlife of the American West, Wildlife of the American West Art Museum, National Museum of Wildlife Art, National Museum of Wildlife Art of the United States.
Bill, is she right? That's not what I was thinking. I think there might be 5.
Uh-oh.
Okay, let's see what Maggie said. Bill says.
Wildlife of the American West, Art Museum, Jackson Hole. National Wildlife Art Museum. National Museum of Wildlife Art. National Museum of Wildlife Art of the United States. Thank you, Maggie Spell.
And I believe we had to change the second one, which was National Wildlife Art Museum, because it was too similar to National Wildlife Federation. Is that correct? Good memory, Bill. Number 3, what museum director organized the educational program called Wildlife Art, Kitsch or Kunst? Maggie.
Francine Carraro. Dr. Francine Carraro.
Correct.
She led the charge, I will tell you.
Okay, number 4. There are 5 questions. We're getting close. Number 4. Why is there a metal sign in the basement that reads Ewing Basement? Dick?
Well, as I recall, in Santa Fe, at a board retreat, Bob Ewing stood up and insisted that this museum build enough storage space underground, which wasn't originally planned for. And Bob was very adamant, and he was absolutely right. Is that right?
That's correct. Bill, is that? And is Joe in the audience? Joe, did you make the sign?
No, it was made by Jacobson Construction on site right away. We hung it before we put the rest of the building up. It was there.
But did they make it because you asked them to?
Dan Rowell did.
Okay, well done.
Last question. Who wore a cheerleading costume to a board meeting and why?
Go ahead, Maggie, because I was going to guess.
During the capital campaign for the building, we were struggling, trying to raise money, and Bob Dellenbach, he led the capital campaign. Do you remember?
Yes.
And he appeared in a full cheerleading outfit, a pleated skirt. I remember it clearly. He was masterful at raising money. He really was.
Did he shave his legs?
Probably not.
Thank you, Maggie. Okay, a round of applause for our panel. What I'd like to do now is invite... Can you still hear me? Okay. What I'd like to do now is invite each of our panelists to state their name and give a 30-second explanation of their motivation for getting involved in the founding of the National Museum of Wildlife Art. In other words, how did you say yes to the idea and why did you say yes to the idea? Let's start with Bill Kerr. Oh, let's start with Kavar, actually, because Kavar's on the end. So the question is, and Bill, this one's a harder one for you to do because, yeah. So if you want to pass on this one, but Kavar's going to start and tell us how she got involved and why she got involved.
We got involved with starting the museum because of the 2 people sitting to my left, Mr. and Mrs. Scarlett. Long time ago, there was an old building in downtown Denver across the street from the Brown Palace. It was the Navarre restaurant at that time. I believe it had a more checkered past in the early 1900s. In any event, it was bought by a gentleman named Bill Foxley, and he turned the Navarre into a personal museum. He had a wonderful collection of wildlife art, of Western art, including wildlife art by Carl Rungus. At one point, he invited Jaffa, and I knew him through the Cowboy Museum in Oklahoma City. And he invited us to send a show of our wildlife collection up to be displayed in Denver on one floor of his museum. Well, these folks were in Denver probably for the Westerner of the West or the stock show or something. And they wandered in and saw the wildlife collection on the top floor of Mr. Foxley's museum. And Maggie said to Dick, it's got to be the Kurds. So they cornered us and said, is that your art? And we said, yes. And they said, well, why don't we start a museum in Jackson? And Dick said, yeah, the museum in Cody's sniffing around and wants to start a satellite in Jackson. And he said, Jackson's not going to be anybody's satellite. And therein, four pilgrims started on a long, long road.
Anything to add, Maggie, about your motivation for getting involved?
Well, I actually think that the trustees were interested in Dick joining them. But Dick was very busy, and he said to me, would you like to become involved? And I said, in a minute. And so it was an opportunity that presented itself. Seeing these phenomenal masterpieces on the walls of Bill Foxley's museum, having just become acquainted with Bill and Java, hearing that they were interested in keeping their collection together and they were looking for a home, it was an opportunity that couldn't be resisted. And I remember Dick clearly saying, Jackson needs a museum of its own. So for me, it was the opportunity, it was the absolute privilege of a lifetime.
Well, we had just were moving up from Denver to Jackson Hole, and when we saw the collection, and we were really taken back by it, and we got up here and ran into Peter Hasrick, who was a great guy from the Cody Museum, and he was over here several times and nosing around, and he would talk to me about it, about the satellite. Then I heard, and this is my side of the story, then I heard that the Kerr family had this collection. I said, my gosh, we've seen it in Denver, that they were looking for a home for it. And we got in touch with them and said, we have the old Power and Light building on the corner. It used to be Moo's Ice Cream most recently, and now Wells Fargo is making a branch out of it and selling the rest of their building. But we bought that building when the Lower Valley left and built their new quarters south of town. And so Maggie and I bought that building to preserve it. We didn't know what to do with it. We had lots of opportunities for daylight donuts and that kind of stuff, and we wouldn't rent it. And then we heard about the museum, the Kurz collection, and ended up getting a hold of, I think it was Stan Klassen, someplace in there, and the Kurz, and said, we'll give you this building for 5 years, rent-free, if you pay the insurance and the taxes on it, and you can do whatever you want to, because frankly, we felt it was a tear down at some point. And that's how, at the end of 5 years, this museum had taken off so well, popular with the direction of Sue and the docents and the Kerr family, that they decided they needed to build their own building and had acquired this land right here. And so I had shareholders in the company, and we bought this building out of our company, and I said, well, to Dan Provo, Dan, you had it for 5 years free. I really ought to get something. And I think property on the square was going for 10 or 12,000 a month rent. I said, I need to get something for it. And so I said, just write me a letter and tell me what you think the museum can afford to pay. And I got a letter from him a couple days later, and it said, he said, I think we can afford $1,000 a month. And I took the letter and I wrote, accepted, signed my name, dated it, and sent it back to him. Didn't matter how much he said, we were going to accept it. And so that's part of the rest of the story.
Some of you may not know, but Sue was the first ever curator of the collection, and I'd love to hear, Sue, how you first got involved.
So I was working at Trailside. I had graduated with a bachelor's in art history with a focus on 19th century American landscape painting. And I was at Trailside and I met this lovely older couple who I spent a lot of time with, and I kept having to tell Christine Mulring that I was sure they were going to buy something. I just needed a little more time. And, and that was Red and Jane Smith. And they became some of my dearest friends. And Bill Kerr and Jaffa were talking to Red and Jane because they had the common interest of Rungius, and Red and Jane were Rungius's friends, and they had Rungius's in their collection and were very involved and interested in what you guys were doing. And they said to Bill that you were looking for a curator of the museum, and they said, well, we know a young woman down at Trailside who actually has an art history degree. And so Bill came in, and we became friends, and he and Jaffa offered me the job, and who would have said no to that? But I did say I need a little break. I'm off to New York. And he said, well, we'll take you when you get back. And they handed me, I went to the house, I looked at some Rungiuses. I didn't even know about Rungius, but I was happy to learn, and I fell in love with the work. And them. That was easy.
Kamar, anything to add? I know that you, in a way, didn't have a choice about your...
That's what I was going to say. I didn't have a choice. So that's about all I can add.
Yeah, you didn't tell us your dad was a Republican either.
I thought you knew.
He was too good a guy to be a
Thank you all. That was a great introduction. Gave everybody a sense who each of these people are. The next question, and we won't have time to have everybody answer each of the following questions, but the next question is, what was the biggest challenge you remember from the early days? Was there ever a moment when you thought maybe this wouldn't work? Maggie?
I'll start, but I think you are the one really to answer this. You know, there were some logistical issues at the beginning that I recall. Fortunately, we had community leaders very involved and supportive, like Sam Leitner and Tom Christie, certainly two of the leaders who helped us get through the, I won't say perilous, but somewhat difficult path for all of the approvals, et cetera. And I'm talking more, I guess, about the building 7 years later than I am about the very beginning. I think in the beginning we didn't know what we didn't know. And things like renovating a lower valley power and light building where the trucks used to pull in and out, and somehow making that an acceptable environment for art masterpieces. Storage, we didn't have nearly enough storage, so many of those masterpieces ended up, no surprise, in the basement of the bank next door.
The vault.
The vault.
It was called the morgue.
And there were some that ended up in Marion Buckenroth's garage. Jane was mentioning the other day, remembering running over to the bank and, carting art into the back of the museum. So I think there were a lot of questions at the beginning, but certainly just the physical setup. I also remember, and Sue will remember this too, that when we would entertain, for instance, the miniature show or something like that, you were looking at two of the cooks on the stage here, and Java, of course, joined in, and Marion Buckenroth, who, phenomenal woman, no longer lives in Jackson, but I hope that most of you remember Marion, because it was her kitchen where we all got together and cooked and brought food in for the events. So there were all of those issues right at the beginning that none of us had considered.
Bill, anything to add about challenges?
We opened mid-May, I think it was the 17th of 87. And we had to, in addition to the wildlife art, we wanted to have a guest exhibit. Something to get people's attention besides just more wildlife art, which people were used to seeing in Jackson, if not necessarily works like Rungus and Wilberforce and Cunard. Anyway, then Senator David Bourne, who had been governor of Oklahoma, heard what we were doing, and he said, "You need to get some stuff up there from Gilcrease." He said, "Molly's on their board of trustees. We'll talk to her." Long story short, Gilcrease sent us a room full of paintings by George Catlin, Alfred Jacob Miller, Albert Bierstadt, Charles Russell, Frederick Remington, etc. And we had Treasures of the Gilcrease as our opening guest exhibit. And then, of course, that got people's attention. And it got my attention because we had our own art and the building insured for $3 million. And when we called the insurance agency, there was an art outfit in Los Angeles that said, "We're bringing a show up from Tulsa. We need a rider on our policy to cover this stuff." It was 1987. And they said, "Well, okay." They checked what was coming. They said, "You're now covered. We raised your coverage from $3 million to $15 million." So that really put things in perspective for where we were at.
Thank you. Second. We're going to switch to the other end of the spectrum now and ask, what was the biggest success you remember from the early days? Maybe it was an acquisition, a donation, an award, an exhibit, a strategic hire. Anyone like to speak to a success that you remember from the early days? I know there were many.
This is not quite on that line, but it was a great success, and we're talking about the early volunteers. And if you can think of some of the names, I will call them out, but Marion Buckenroth and Mary Mead and
Pam McCool.
Right. Who else?
Marianne Cree,
Yes.
Bill Newton's wife.
Eliza Christie. Eliza Christie.
Anybody else?
Think of some of them. I know there's some gray hairs in this room besides me who go back that far.
Well, thank you for mentioning that. The volunteers have always been, and still are today, really important to the success of this museum.
Who else?
So I was just thinking about one of the successes, and one of the extraordinary opportunities we had, like Treasures of the Gilcrease, is we had an exhibition called Thomas Moran Yellowstone, The Poetry of Power, which was that was my favorite exhibit we had, visiting exhibit, that opened in 1988 in September. And it was extraordinary. It was watercolors of Yellowstone done in the field. I think they dated 1871 to 72 for field sketches, and there were a few 1873 pieces from the Gilcrease. It was extraordinary. And you could feel the power of place in that room when those paintings were up there. I spent the night there a couple nights.
I'm going to skip to question number 3, unless you had something to add. Okay. Let's see, 4, I guess. What stars aligned to make it possible for the Kerr collection to come to Jackson, Wyoming? As we know, it could have gone anywhere, but it came here.
Mr. Kerr, we're waiting for you.
Well, one star that aligned was, there's a gentleman here in Jackson that owned the Jack Dennis store named Sam Leitner, and his wife Robin. Sam was the managing partner of a group that owned the Jack Dennis store. And he was on Dick's board of directors at Jackson State Bank. And I'd never met Mr. Leitner, but in 1986, the summer of '86, we were at a Grand Teton Music Festival function out in John Dodge Development, somebody's big mansion, and dinner jackets, strolling violins, and all this stuff. And this fella came up to me and he said, "You Bill Kerr?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "You from Oklahoma?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "I'm from Texas." And he said, "Scarlett tells me you're going to start an art museum here for wildlife art." I said, "Well, we've just been talking about it." He says, "I got $100,000 I'm going to put on the table to help you get started." We got started.
What memories do you have of the architectural plan and location for our current museum building? Was it controversial?
Well, I'll just start this, but it's your question. I recall that, let's see, I guess 5 years after we opened, it became apparent that we were off to a great start and we should relocate to a larger facility, something more suited to this fabulous collection. And so a committee was put together, as I recall, and Bill Weiss, I think, was the chairman of that committee, and I ended up serving with him. And Bill Weiss is an amazingly organized individual. And I recall going out and visiting sites around town. For instance, one site I visited was the Cooter Motel, which is still there on Cash Street. And another site that we looked at was across from the Word Hotel, that building that's there now. I don't know what was there then, but
It was a gas station.
a gas station. So we considered that.
Monica station.
But at the end of the day, all roads led north to Rising Sage. And that's where I'll turn the microphone over to Bill.
The committee settled on the Rising Sage, and then we had to design the building. And you were asking about the architecture of the new building. So we interviewed 5 firms, Albuquerque, Seattle, Denver, I can't remember where they were all from, but we chose a firm from Denver. They visited the site. Tom Christie, I think, chaired the site, the architectural committee. And when Tom was interviewing architects, he had a very subtle way of opening the conversation. A representative or two or three would come in the room and sit down, and Tom would welcome them, and then he'd say, "Now, Mr. Architect, you going to build your building, or are you going to build our building?" And they had that set the mood for the discussion. In any event, they chose Fentress and Bradford in Denver, and they came up with some of the worst designs you can possibly imagine. And the architectural committee said, no. There was glass walls for a quarter mile across the right of the city. And that wasn't what the committee had in mind. They said, we want something that looks like it belongs in its place. They wanted something that looked indigenous. They wanted something that after 5 years would look like it had been there for 50 years. They wanted it to be appropriate to our mission to bring wildlife and people together. And Mr. Christie and my wife discovered a photograph in a coffee table book of Slains Castle, which is on the northeast coast of Scotland. And they took it to the architects and said, think about this. And they came back with the design that all of you now recognize as the place on the hill. And if anybody want to see that, you're welcome to. But when they came back with the design of the building as you see it now, the board just went nuts and said, that's what we want.
So question about the community. Were they as excited as the board?
Oh, the county commissioners.
That was what I was talking about before. No, I'll let you talk about it.
What are you trying to build out there, a pueblo? Did you find that in some deserted village in the Arizona desert? I mean, they called it everything. And then they, I'll just tell the story this way. The county commission at that time put us through 6 months of torture. And when it was all over, we estimated that it cost about $150,000 extra above budget to just get the county's permission to build the building as it was designed out here.
And everyone loves the building now, I would say. In the community, I have heard nothing but good things over the years about people absolutely loving this building.
I just wanted to add that while they were being so critical of the design, on the other hand, they were absolutely paranoid that we were going to build something that wouldn't blend into the environment. And so here we had this beautiful concept, and they just could not let go of control. It really was a very difficult time. One of the saddest moments for me during all of this process was when Javac came to me one afternoon and said, "Do you really think Jackson wants a museum?" Oh, and I said, "We're just going to get past this, Javac. They want it."
Let me see a show of hands if everybody remembers what was here before the museum. You remember the lean-tos with the Mexican rugs? out here on the highway, and up above it was a indoor swimming pool, as I recall, on the next level up here. And in one end, I think as I recall, they had horseback rides, had a little corral with some ponies, horses in there. I mean, you talk about ticky-tack. And the county commissioners, what they put our group through to clean that up and come up with this was a crime.
Thank you for being determined. Well, here's another question. What is the funniest thing you remember about the early days?
I didn't do it.
Yes, you did.
I walked into I used to leave at noon, walk down to the Cadillac Grill for lunch. That was my lunch hangout. And as I walked by the museum, I thought, well, I'll stick my head in and see what's new. Well, I stuck my head in, and there is this huge buffalo bronze. Turns out it was a Proctor, Finister Proctor. I didn't know one bronze from the other. It could have been Harry Jackson's for all I know. and it's sitting right in the middle where you walk in, and there it is. And I looked at that and I thought, gee, this is supposed to be an art museum. What is this thing doing there? And so I got a thought in my mind, and I went back, got in my car, went out to the house. We had 5 horses at that time and 3 little children, and so that meant I had little saddles. And you probably saw the picture up here. You know what the rest of the story is. I slid back into town, walked in, put the saddle on, strapped it on, and left.
And then Bill walked in.
Well, he's our landlord to begin with. And I personally owe him money to boot. But it really was a bad idea. The particular bronze by
Finister Proctor.
Alexander Finister Proctor was a one-of-a-kind object that Proctor had been commissioned by a gentleman who had a big estate on Long Island, and he said, I want a buffalo in my backyard. And Proctor created this piece for him. It was quite similar to the bronzes he did for the Q Street Bridge in Washington, D.C. of 4 larger than life-size bison that anchor the 4 corners of the bridge from Embassy Row over to Georgetown across Rock Creek Park. So it was a historic piece, it was a unique piece, it was a valuable piece.
I have good taste.
Always.
Bill, who took it off? Do you recall? Who removed the saddle?
Who attacked the bison?
I'm sure it was our curator.
No, it was Tim Jacobson.
Oh, okay.
He was a rich boy.
I'm going to skip to this question. How do the personalities of our founders, Bill and Javac, carry on in the museum today?
I had to write it down. Okay, just a sec. Okay. I had to cheat a little. So this was just off the top of my head. So the thing about both of them is they're both really passionate people, intellectually curious, interested in the world around them and about everybody they come across. They are, they're opinionated.
Did Bill write this?
They both have have a good eye. They both have a great love of art, which they developed over time, and they truly, they nurture, they have an innate desire to share what they love. And so their passion for the art that they collected is definitely in every single bit of this, but I think about, Bill is a nurturer and so sorry, Papa. I mean, that's how I see it. and he's very caring, and both he and Javac are full of love, and they are generous as could be. But I would say that in those days that I saw Javac as a bit more willing to push the envelope, a bit more willing to take some chances with the art that came into the collection over time, and that made a huge difference in our growth and our willingness to change our initial mission. And they both have incredible vision, and thanks to them, we all get to be a part of their vision.
What would you all hope to see if you were to visit this museum in 10 years' time? Gabar?
I hope it's still here. I would love to see this museum be here for my great niece's grandchildren. It's a beautiful place that anybody who walks in the door is going to get a great gift. And I want that to happen to every single person that walks in the door. I want them to get that gift, because that's the way I feel when I walk in the door.
What I think I'd like to do next is take a few questions from the audience for any of our panelists, and then we'll do a wrap-up. Yes, Connie.
I don't have a question, but I would like to say that I joined the museum as a volunteer in 1994 when I retired from teaching. And so I've been a volunteer since. And the volunteers love road trips. So our first road trip was, of course, to Tulsa, Oklahoma, to the Gilcrease to see the Thomas Moran show. And we got there and were so thrilled. And it was this marvelous color. And the museum at that time had all the galleries were kind of a light gray. And we said, we have to have color. And so we came back and we said, we need color. And they said, well, it's not in our budget for, this year. So some of us I know gave $50. They painted the Gilcrease Gallery a beautiful sage green, and we've had color ever since.
Yes.
I just wanted to say, I've been a museum curator at 3 continents and an artist, and this museum is totally remarkable. And, I don't know if you know, it is the only national museum of wildlife art in the world. National museums. So that is pretty bloody remarkable. Thank you.
I would just like to ask if you have any way to gauge what economic impact having the museum here has had on Jackson.
That's a great question. Does anyone, either on the panel or in the audience, have any insight into that question? The impact that this museum has had on the economy of this whole area, of the town.
I would just say that it has been a major contributor to the attraction of Jackson Hole, along with the continued development of the Grand Teton Music Festival, which you talk about the legs of the community. When you have a world-class art museum like this, and you have a world-class orchestra that plays every summer, and you have the tea times, and the fourth wave is the wonderful people that live here and support this museum.
I want to brag on us a little bit and say that I think it helped create a larger market for the wildlife art market segment in the whole art world, which has brought a lot of attention to Jackson Hole, to the galleries, to the artists, and I think it's been a win-win for everybody.
Yes, at the back.
And I would like to personally thank each of you personally for the chance for a very young artist to be included in your first miniature show at a time that these museum shows were fairly new. And what a boost it was for my confidence and my career over time. Being very young artist, I was thrilled to be invited, and thank you.
Big Kathy.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was Kathy Whitler from Jackson Hole.
Yes.
In celebrating wildlife through art, what ways do you feel like art and the museum has changed yours or the lives of others in direct relation to the wildlife of this country and immediate area?
Directed to any particular person?
Anyone.
Okay. So the question is, how do you feel that this museum has contributed to wildlife art in general? Did I get that right?
Connection between people and the wildlife itself.
Oh yes, okay. More specifically, between people and the wildlife out in the natural habitat. How has this art helped people make those connections?
Well, I'll just start off by saying from the beginning, our mission was an education-based mission. But it also always included bringing people, wildlife, and art together. So that certainly was our mission from the beginning. And I would say after 30 years that we've achieved a great deal through education. Jane Levino, one of the best things I've done in a long time is ask her to head up this program today. She is a stellar educator. And so that program certainly has been beneficial in reaching that goal that you're talking about.
I drive slower.
Jane, I don't want to take questions away from you, but I'd like to, pretend I'm in the audience, I just think it's an amazing story about how you chose to collect wildlife art. And I wonder if you might give us that story. How you chose wildlife when you were maybe thinking you'd collect the Taos guys.
Jaffa, I graduated from law school in '62. We went to Minnesota that summer with our children. And as we did almost every summer with small kids, we fished with cane poles off the dock and had wonderful times. Anyway, we were leaving, going back to Oklahoma for school to start, and stopped in Minneapolis and wandered into an art gallery, the American Wildlife Art Gallery. And there was a picture on the wall of crappie, bluegills, ring perch, all kinds of panfish. Just exactly what we'd been doing for the last 3 weeks. And Jaffa said, I didn't give you anything for finishing law school. And she said, I'm gonna buy that painting for you. So she did, and we took it home with us, and it became a very prized possession. Now, 2 years later, we went back to that gallery after another trip to Minnesota, and we saw an etching of a bull moose by Carl Rungus. And we both said, wow, that's pretty special. And that kind of serendipitously or providentially put us on the trail of wildlife art. But it all started with a mess of panfish.
We are coming close on our time, so I'd like to end by asking,
Two more.
Okay, yes.
Yeah, I just want to say, picking up on what Kathy said, in addition to really actively helping promote the careers of living artists, which is something really rare for any museum to do, the other thing that you've done that I think can't be underestimated is to help living, struggling artists position themselves within a broader art historical continuum. And that is something that cements our place in a broader scope of art history, that lends us legitimacy, that gives us confidence, that attaches value to what we do in a greater art world that doesn't always put that much value on what we do as wildlife painters and sculptors. And I just want to thank you for the bottom of my heart for doing that.
Yes, Mary.
I really, really enjoy all the changes that have happened in the last 2 or 3 years. And my question is, behind the scenes, who's responsible for those decisions, and are there a lot of arguments?
The Board of Trustees working cooperatively with the professional staff. And we also truly get input from the volunteers that talk to the visitors. They'll tell us about them, what they've heard, what they've seen, what they've experienced. And it makes for a nice mix that brings new ideas to the surface that you try. Not all of them work, but it's the volunteers telling us what they hear, the staff refining the ideas, the trustees weighing the merits, the cost, the other elements that go with the responsibility for keeping the institution on a steady course. And it's like a kaleidoscope. It clicks continually, and I hope it will continue, just to change with the times.
One more question at the back.
This museum started, first off, I'd also like to thank you guys. You have created an institution that all of us can measure where we are within our tradition and measure our own, basically, progress. You've given us things to challenge what we think. But this museum was started and nobody knew what this was. And one of the hard things that I think this institution and all museums are facing is that the people who we want to come into this place have no real experience. Their experience is digital. They have no real experience with the stories and the observations that these artists are talking about. And how this museum helps bridge that gap, I think, is going to be a challenge for every art museum. Not just this one, but because we are so focused on the relationship of what we have seen to how it affects the world outside and to how it affects the people and their experience with it. you just have a much, much bigger job. In many ways than, let's say, the Met or other institutions who just have an audience that frankly isn't shrinking as fast.
Lots to think about for the future. And thank goodness we have people who seriously consider all of these questions and talk with each other, and all of you, people on tours. The program yesterday, thank you, was really thought-provoking. And as you said, Kaleidoscope keeps clicking, and with all the passion we have, I am confident that we will keep changing and coming up with new solutions as they're needed.
If I say one more thing, Walter, everything you said is true in the moment. But for as long as humans have recorded their presence on this planet, they've recorded the wildlife that was around them. And I really subscribe to E.O. Wilson's biophilia thesis that there's an ineffable relationship between humankind and animal kind that is a need that all of us sooner or later discover in ourselves, especially when we come to a place like Yellowstone or Olympic National Park or Churchill, Manitoba, or the Serengeti or the Okavango Delta. You realize that we're not in this world alone, and we're all traveling together. And I don't think that digitization will ever breed that out of humankind or creature fellow travelers. Thank you.
I think that's a great statement to end on. Would anyone on the panel have any other final thoughts to share before we draw to a conclusion?
Thank you.
One more thing, and that is to thank all of you. Our panelists have done a great job thinking about this and also speaking and thinking on the spot. I want to thank Amy Boycachea and Jeff Lestishin, who oversee the Western Visions program, Steve Siemens, our director, and you, our wonderful audience of museum lovers and supporters. Thank you.